That's where I left it. Okay, so we are at the point in this quarter as we go through the book of Daniel of looking at individual examples of faithfulness. In the foreign land of Babylon, we have these men who are standing out as different from the world that is around them, and there's a lot to be learned from them. Last week we covered Daniel chapter 1 and the unclean foods and their rejection of that and trusting God to provide them with physical health, even though they're just going to eat vegetables. Today we're going to cover the fiery furnace and looking at Daniel chapter 3 and the example there of Nebuchadnezzar building an image of gold and what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. The difficulty I find with, ironically, a class with such a powerful story is that it's one that most people are pretty familiar with already, right? So the tendency is to say, okay, we already know this story a bit, so how do you get any more out of it? It's the orange that's already been wrung of all the juice. And so one of the things I like to do whenever we run into a class like this where it's a section of the Bible that people tend to be very fond of and more familiar with is just ask right up front, why do y'all even like it? Why do people like this particular story? It resonates with us for some reason. Why does it with you?
It helps me embolden my faith because these men, like the king was, God can do what he wants. He may or may not deliver us, but he has that capability. Whether he does, it's really indifferent to us because we're not going to bow down to your image anyway. And that's the bottom line, and we need to have that same faith. That the bottom line is God is in charge. He'll do what he does according to his will, but I'll do my best to try to please him. Be the child he wants me to be.
So it emboldens your faith to, if they can do it, I can do it.
Right.
Anything else? It is just so cool. There are some stories that are just that way. In fact, I was talking at home about the story of Ehud, the left-handed guy who stabbed a guy, and then the knife, the guy was so fat that the knife stuck in him. And we were just talking about, like, that's a cool story. There's just some cool stories in the Bible. We were also talking about, at what point did Ehud go, you can keep it? You know, like, there's a point somewhere, I'm not going to get that back. This is one of those. It's just epic in its nature, right? Just this whole idea of these three guys against the world and God saving them. Yeah. Yeah, when we're facing stuff and we do, as you said, wonder where is God. The interesting is they didn't have an answer to that either, but they knew he would be there. Yeah.
In Daniel chapter 3, two authorities, both lawful. Nebuchadnezzar, who was appointed by God, ruler, who had legal authority to do what he did. Mm-hmm. Then you have an upper authority that is the true authority. You have two judges. You have one that we will suffer here on the earth. Of course, this one, there was a miracle. God spared them. But we have the faith to know that even if he doesn't, like them, that if we do follow the second authority, that regardless of whether we're punished here in the flesh, we shall be rewarded in heaven. Mm-hmm. So this idea that this was God ordained, this government, picked it, chose it, specifically called
right.
Nebuchadnezzar. And then Nebuchadnezzar did this. And these men had to choose whether or not they follow the government, to follow the legal, law-abiding ruler, or whether they stood up for what they knew to believe was right.
Yeah, there is a very clear clash between earthly and heavenly authority. And as you said, the earthly authority was legitimate. It just was subject to the greater authority. Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think there is something about the fact that this story just exists in a vacuum and is beautiful unto itself. And it's clear. It's the way I like my movies. I want the good guys to win, the bad guys to lose. That's the way, that's the way I want it to play out. So, yes. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I wondered if somebody would bring that one up, because that's one that it does kind of make the hair stand up on your arms, is when they're in the fire, and in the fire says there's a fourth guy in there, one that looks like Son of God. And that just makes you, that also is just in and of itself a lesson, right? And we do this in our own life. We go through things and we say, I'm going through a fiery trial. I'm going through something, I'm being tested by fire, trial by fire. That's a common saying. And when we go through those, to think, there's one like the Son of God in the fire with me. Right? Just that sort of thing, there's some comfort there. Yes?
I think it's kind of amazing, though. Nebuchadnezzar was the man that made the idol and obviously had idol worship, but yet he says this being appears to be like the Son of God. So how would he know what the Son of God looks like? I guess it just came into his mind that this being had to be a higher power of God than what his idol gods, because his idol gods couldn't say or do anything. He's sitting there, and here's a living being that's protecting these men from being harmed, not even to smell like smoke on them when they walk out of the fire. So, I mean, it just totally overwhelmed him for him to come to the conclusion it had to be somebody like the Son of God.
Yeah, you asked the question, how could Nebuchadnezzar know that this is one that looks like the Son of God, since he'd never seen it before? And I would put it as one of those things where I don't know what it looks like to see God, but I'll tell you, I'll know it when I see it. I think that's what happened, right? There was a little bit of, I know it when I see it. Anybody else have anything before we kind of shift gears now? Okay. Well, you've highlighted the point already, right? This is a beloved story, and there's so many wonderful things in it that are very applicable to what it's like to be people today. So Daniel 3 begins with Nebuchadnezzar building this golden image. We do not know for sure what the cause of him building this golden image is. But I will say, if you back up one chapter, what was Nebuchadnezzar just referred to as in the previous chapter? Somebody said it. Yeah, golden head. So it may very well be that he's gotten this answer to his vision, right? Because Nebuchadnezzar had that dream, and he's the golden image at the top of it. And Nebuchadnezzar, in true Nebuchadnezzar fashion, this would not be outside of his character, goes, That's right, I'm the golden image. And so he makes a statue. Now, we don't know that for sure, and it really doesn't matter for the sake of the story, because no matter what, he makes this statue and then tells everybody, you need to bow down and worship it. So it doesn't matter why, but that is, in the context of the book, that's a decent kind of transition that makes you wonder if those two are connected. The height of the statue is about 90 feet, which is the length between baseball bases. If you're trying to think of it in your mind, you're running the first, that's the distance. So it's tall. It's very tall. And so Nebuchadnezzar builds this, and he builds it out in the plain of Dura. It's in the province of Babylon, but it's outside of kind of the city center. So this is a little bit of a journey to go out there. And he calls all of the ruling classes to view the dedication of this particular image. Now, what's going to make this story so powerful is the fact that these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, will refuse to bow down. But a couple of things that we should consider with this is, there is actually a story of a guy that gave himself the excuse of bowing down to a false god, and we actually like the guy. And I'm going to bring up this story just so that we can realize it would have been very easy for them to rationalize, we're just doing our job. I'm not bowing down and worshiping because I actually believe in this golden image. I'm just doing it because essentially my boss told me to. If you go over to 2 Kings, turn over your Bible to 2 Kings chapter 5. In 2 Kings chapter 5, we are introduced to a guy by the name of Naaman. What's Naaman known for? He's known for being a leper, and then he's also known for no longer being a leper, right? That's what we know Naaman for. So Naaman, if you look in the context of the story, Naaman in chapter 5 there, he's a leper, but he's also a valiant warrior. He's a captain of an army. He's not Jewish, and he doesn't know anything about the one true and living God, but then he eventually comes to Elisha, and Elisha, after a series of events, will heal him. And when you get down to the very end of this story, in verse 17, Naaman, after he's healed, will say, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules load of earth from the land of Israel. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offering, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. So far, perfect, right? Naaman has figured it out. There's a one true and living God. All the false gods of Aram and all the other nations, they're not real gods. And he even wants dirt from the land so he can build an altar and only sacrifice that one God. But then look at the very next verse. 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 18, it says, in this matter, may the Lord, and that word is Jehovah, may Jehovah pardon your servant. When my master, who's Naaman's master? You read about the very beginning of the chapter. Who's the master of Naaman? Yeah, king of Syria. So the king. So when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And he said to him, go in peace, so he departed from him some distance. How many of you even remember that part of the story of Naaman? Most people don't even remember it. Right? Like it's a weird little extra anecdote. We left him at the water. 7 dips, you're good. We moved on. But at the end of this story, he says, I will worship God, but when the king goes in to worship his God and he leans on my hand and I bow down then, Please can I be pardoned? And you don't even remember it because what your brain did when you read that is you go, man, what a nice guy. That's a very small thing to ask. Now, the reason I bring it up is, couldn't Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have used that same excuse? Like, we're not going to actually worship false gods, but when the king has a dedication to his God, and he tells us we're going to play the music, and everybody's going to bow at that point, I'm just doing my job. And we would easily be able to find rationale for that. Now, I will say in the case of Naaman, the reason that I give him a bit of a pass, personally, and that you don't even have to give him a pass. I'm just saying I do, which really doesn't matter for him either. The reason I do is I go, this guy was pretty immature, right? He doesn't know much. He's brand new at this. Today, he's figured out there's one true and living God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, though, they're not new at this, are they? They know all about how God is a jealous God, and he doesn't accept any other God, nor is he going to be okay with it. They would be very familiar with the Ten Commandments and all that kind of stuff. So the reason I put that there is so we can realize what they're doing would be easily rationalized away if they chose to go the other route. It is so... Scott mentioned them being like superheroes. I think the superheroes started early. You know, the fiery furnace part, that's pretty cool. But the superhuman behavior, the extraordinary behavior began when they just refused to rationalize. So as we think about these men, and they're told, and by the way, as we go through it, it's very clear. There's no wiggle room in this, is there? And we're going to play, he calls all the ruling classes together. Then in verse 4, the herald loudly proclaimed, to you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast in the midst of a furnace of a blazing fire. No wiggle room, is there? If you fall down, what are you doing? It's worship. That's what he says, right? He says you've got to fall down and worship. So anything that's an in-between is a statement of agreement. Do you have something? Nope? Okay. So, now I remember right before I came, I think Jeremy DeHutt gave a lesson here on this particular story. And I listened to it, he did a really good job. But in that, he mentioned that there were various types of excuses you could use. What are some excuses you could use to get by and not have a confrontation? Right. Yeah, it's like, oh, boy, I really need to... I couldn't do that. I don't have any shoelaces. But somebody could, right? I gotta tie my shoe. Yeah. Anything else?
Got a bad knee and fell down.
That's right. Just at that exact moment, boy, just kind of hadn't seen the chiropractor in a while, so down I go. Anything else? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to do this one thing, and I know it's wrong, but I'm doing it for the greater good. Yeah, if I'm alive, I can do more good, and I can have influence, and that's a decent argument to be made. I mean, there's 4 of them in the ruling classes, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and nobody else. Like, if we're gone, who's going to stand up? Any others? Come on, y'all rationalize for yourself all the time. There you go. Yeah, I'll bow down, but I'll be praying to God. God will know my heart. Right? Yeah, Scott? Oh, he said it? Yeah, you Scots, you got the mind meld thing going on over there. I actually only had him talk just so that everybody else could know, but I knew. Yeah, and we do that sort of thing all the time too. It's like God knows my heart, so I know outwardly it looks like this, but inwardly He knows better. Yeah.
We think that this is such a thing so far distant past that it's unrelatable. But when I was in Iraq, there was a neighboring city called Oja, which was a place of great honor for Saddam Hussein around his birthplace. He went through there one time leading a parade. And everyone that was in Oja was supposed to come out to the street. They were supposed to stand up when he came by, and they were supposed to applaud. And this guy was telling me, an officer, told me, he said, this one man refused to stand. So one of the lead vehicles stopped, got out, drug him out from the crowd, shot him in the head. To go down the road, the family had to drag him back off. So these decisions, still happen in the world today. Right now, people are being persecuted in China. If they're going to confess Christ, well, they can be detained by the communist government in China, locked up. There's a story about a guy that was without natural light for 3 months.
Wow.
Locked up. And he said that at one point he forgot time and space. He didn't know where he was. So he tried to kill himself by banging his head against the wall. And so the thing is, this is not completely abstract. Your sermon about empathy. This is happening to people today.
Right.
Absolutely. And we could be forced, any of us, with that decision. It shouldn't be abstract. It should be concrete. Like you said, the superhero determination that regardless
started early
of what's going to happen, we're going to make the decision now.
Yeah, and it is true that we live in a time and a place where we've enjoyed a lot of peace, but that is not always the case in every part of the world, and oftentimes it's small compromises that lead to character flaws down the road, right? So with these men, they play the song, they don't use any of the rationale that we talked about. And then in verse 8 it says, for this reason at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. And they responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar, King, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree. They list the decree. And then list the punishment if they don't follow it. And then verse 12 says, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you set up. Now we'll see this more, I think even more clearly next week when we look at Daniel and the lion's den. But it is very clearly known that of these ruling classes who are summoned, they know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are aware that they didn't bow down, and they even know why. So nobody gives this a pass. There's certain Chaldeans who come up and make sure Nebuchadnezzar knows. We don't know for sure why that would be, but what's a good guess? Why these Chaldeans would make sure that, Nebuchadnezzar knows about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Just simple jealousy, right? And the reason I say we'll talk more about it when we get to Daniel and the lion's den is we know for sure it was jealousy in the case of Daniel then, because he had risen above his peers. But we've already read, of all the men that had been brought, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had already begun to rise amongst their peers. So it's not too far-fetched of an idea to think that there may be some jealousy going on. And if nothing else, they specifically name them as certain Jews. So the Chaldeans know about the Jewish religion. Something for us to remember is we're not the only people who know what we should be doing. Have you ever been at work and other people aren't Christians, but they know you are a Christian, and they go, wow, I would have never thought you would do that. You're a Christian. Or you can't say that. You're a Christian. Or they'll tell a joke and they'll go, oh, well, so-and-so wouldn't like that, because he's religious. They know what you believe. Yeah.
Just a quick story. When I was in basic training in the Army, I didn't go to chapel services on Sunday because Christians go to stuff. So I would sit on my footlocker and read my Bible every Sunday. There was one man in our barracks. He was probably the most reprobate man in the barracks. I was sitting there one Sunday morning reading my Bible, and the guys came in and started first doing something. He said, "Hey," he said, "this guy told me, he said, you guys ought to read your Bible and be more like Smitty over there sitting on the footlocker." I almost fell off the footlocker. I thought, here's the most reprobate man, but yet he said, these other people need to be living a more righteous life. And I mean, I wasn't trying to play myself as being better than anybody else. I was just doing what I thought God wanted me to do. And like you say, people take notice of that.
They do. They see it. And people are watching. Now, back up in your mind and imagine Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did one of the things that we rationalized. Those people would have still known they were Jews, wouldn't they? And it would have sent an entirely different message to those people who have been listening. Here, maybe it's jealousy that they bring it to the king. Whatever reason it is, doesn't even matter. They saw it. They saw what they were doing and then acted based upon their actions. You just never know. You never know what people are seeing and what they know about you and your belief and where they're at in their life. If
some people have this philosophy, they say anybody can be bought for a price. I mean, if I keep raising the dollar amount, eventually you're going to give in and succumb to whatever I'm going to offer you. A lot of people think that. Like, in this story, they could have had the whole world, they wouldn't have bowed down.
There was no price. Yeah, exactly.
Lower their standards.
And that's the difference between conviction and preference, right? You can have a very strong preference where you say, I really, really strongly feel this way. But if you can be bought to alter it, it's a preference. It's not a conviction. These guys are living with a conviction. And one of the ways that you can see that is, there are at least 4 points that I counted, and there may be more that you see as well, where they could have avoided or averted the catastrophe of going into the furnace. The first one is simply when they were summoned, right? So, they're summoned and told to go. One of them could have easily, said, "Oh, I'm sick today." They could have found some way to not be out there in the plain on that particular day, just to avoid the conflict of it. But they didn't. The next one that I see is, when the music played, now you do something, you tie your shoe, you do something like that, right? And then you can kind of avoid conflict. And we would even put that in a positive light a lot of times. They say, "Oh, that person avoided conflict. They de-escalated the situation." You see how that's a positive a lot of times in our society? They're not doing that. The next one is right now, at Nebuchadnezzar's questioning. So they're brought to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 13, it says, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring them there, and he says, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up?" Now, if you're ready, at the moment, when all these things play, you fall down and worship. And if you do that, very well. So I'll give you a second shot. Be easy, right? Okay, I made my point. We don't like this. Everybody knows we don't like it, but now we'll do it. But they don't. And then the last one I see is when they're being tied up. Like they're being tied up, and at that point you could say, okay. You understand we don't like this, right? You understand that we worship the one true God, but we'll just play it now and we'll do it. There were 4 different stages there where they could have altered the course. And I think that's one of the things about conviction is conviction doesn't work if you only have it once. Right? You ever say, "I'm not going to eat dessert"? Right? And that works until the dessert's, there the second day. Right? It's anything that is true conviction requires repetitive decision. I made that decision yesterday, but I'm also making it today, and I'm making it again tomorrow, and so on and so forth. That's why we're so impressed when the Bible says that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, because most of us are fickle. Right? I may be good one day, but tomorrow I kind of stink. These guys are showing a continuity of character that is a really big deal. What was Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to this? Fury. Yeah, my version says rage, right? It's this huge anger. Have you ever been in front of somebody who's really, really angry? And especially if they're your boss or a superior? And that has a way of really getting you to dial back whatever you were thinking. I was feeling pretty strong in my convictions, but then there's yelling and screaming and table pounding and space bubble breaking. Ever had somebody do that where they break your space bubble and they get right in there? You feel cornered. There's a lot of things you wouldn't do, but as soon as that pressure is applied, it changes. And Nebuchadnezzar, with his rage, is expecting an answer. He's saying, you need to do what I say, or give me a good reason that I accept for why you're not going to. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he requests an answer, and what is their response? That's right. Verse 16, they say, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter." Why is that such a big statement? By the way, that for me personally is one of my favorite things in all of this, is that one sentence. We do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. Why is that a big deal? Right. This isn't, they've already decided what they're going to do.
This goes back to the authority.
Mm-hmm.
You have, back to the military. You have an NCO telling you to do an unlawful order. NCO non-commissioned officer charge. He's telling you to do an unlawful order. Ain't going to do it. Well, I'm telling you you're going to do it, otherwise I'm going to pound you. Ain't going to do it. You're going to tell me why. No, I'm going to the office. I'll tell him why. I'll tell him about the rules and regulations for unlawful orders. These men right here, their actions were answering already.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have to answer him.
Right.
They knew they were going to have to answer God. And in this affair, in this matter, where he was telling them what to do during worship, how to worship, he didn't even deserve an answer.
They weren't required, right? They don't answer to Nebuchadnezzar, not in matters of this. Anybody else have anything? Right. Yeah, that's a great point, because they built into their character so much that this is just simply not going to happen. You think, if I were to tell you Phil murdered somebody yesterday, just stabbed him 100 times, some of you chuckled. That is not a happy story. Why did you chuckle? Because Shane goes, it's not possible. That guy doesn't have it in him. Right? It's just so far outside his character. That's why we can say, by the way, things like it's impossible for God to lie. Like people who want to be skeptics and try and find a flaw in the Bible will say, well, if God's all powerful, how can it be impossible for him to lie? Character. That's what he's saying. The same way it's impossible for Phil to murder. It's just not in the guy. Right? So with these guys, they've built themselves to a point where it's not a discussion. That's what they're saying. This isn't a debate. We're not haggling. We've made our decision, and there's nothing you can say that will change who we're going to be. That's already set in stone. Now, they will go on to explain what their faith is, but they started off by saying, but we don't need to do that. We don't need to for our sake. We're simply doing it so that you understand where we stand. But even if you don't get it, Nebuchadnezzar, doesn't matter. We are who we are. And if you think about that, even that statement, where you've become somebody who is like, this is who I am. You either take it or leave it. We don't worship false gods. If you're going to kill us for it, you're going to kill us for it. But we are who we are. What's the name of your God? What does Jehovah mean? Anybody know? What's Jehovah stand for? Go back to Moses and the burning bush. I am who I am. We're made in the image of God. We're supposed to imitate Him to get to the point where we are who we are. Now, I understand that's much farther reaching with God. God's eternal in both directions and all those sorts of things. So I don't want you to walk away saying, God said some crazy things. I'm just saying, God wants your character to be like His character. So they can't be bought. It just simply is through, and I agree with what you said, Shani, I think it's through that repetition. The more you do it, the more that just becomes who you are, and you can't go back from it. Yes?
That's the end of verse 15, where the king says, who is your God that can deliver you from my hands? And they answered in verse 17, our God is able to deliver us from your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Small G for the God in verse 15. Who's going to deliver from my God? Well, the great big G God is the one who can deliver from your little G God.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about the lowercase g.
Yeah.
I've got the uppercase one.
Right.
Yeah. And then after they say we don't have to give an answer, they also make it clear that they don't know what will happen. So the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego does not remove the unknown. Right? In fact, faith is the evidence of things, what does Hebrews say? Things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So it's like I hope for it, and I don't have it yet. I hope for it. I haven't seen it yet, but I have faith. And that's what these guys are doing. They don't know how it's going to turn out, but they know it will be okay. However that is, very similar to Paul in Philippians, where he says, to live is Christ and to die is gain. I don't know whether I'll live, I don't know whether I'll die, but it'll work out either way. That's what these men are saying. Now, Scott Foster pointed to this at the very beginning when we were talking about the things that we like about this story. They get thrown in the furnace, and they're tied up, and the men who throw them in die. So if there's ever any doubt, is it real fire? Yup. Right? Real fire, real furnace, and when we covered some of the archaeology, there's quite a lot of evidence that these were very big furnaces because there were millions of bricks that he was making at this particular juncture in history. But they're thrown in there, and it says there's 3 men in there, and then there's a 4th one, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of God or a son of the gods, depending on your translation. The idea is this 4th one, whoever he is, and he's never specifically identified, he definitely is not a normal guy. Now, we do not know for sure who this is. Could it be an angel? Absolutely. Are angels able to save people from fiery furnaces? Certainly have indication of that level of power in them, right? But when it says this one is like a son of the gods or a son of God, what does your brain naturally go to? It hops to Jesus, doesn't it? And we know because Jesus clearly states throughout the scriptures that in the Old Testament, it's not like he just appeared in the first century and didn't exist before then. He came down from heaven and took on a body, but he was here before. In fact, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 talks about all those in the wilderness, and he says they drank from the rock that would follow after them, which is Christ. So we know he's been involved in all of these things. And so there is a very decent argument to be made that Jesus was there in the fiery furnace. Now, if Jesus wasn't there and it's just an angel, just an angel. Hebrews tells us that angels are ministering spirits sent on behalf of those who would be saved. Who's doing the sending? This is God's who's sending, right? This is so. Either way, you have this very clear picture of they go into the fiery trial, but they're not alone. They enter it alone, but the battle belongs to the Lord. How many times in our lives are we going to go into battles and we're just like so hard? It's like, how can I ever get through this thing? We have heartaches in our marriages. We have heartaches with our kids. We have heartaches with our jobs. We have heartaches with our health. Just constant. This is a tough world to live in. You know, it used to be okay, and then I started getting older, and I realized there was like real problems. When I was a kid, my problems were big to me. Like, I don't have any candy, you know? But then you start realizing there's real problems in life. How am I ever going to get through this? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the answer is they don't. They don't have to get through it. One like a son of God is there. So just really, really powerful stuff. On the worksheet, just want to make sure that I finish that up for those who are filling that out. At the very end, you get to Daniel chapter 3, verse 28. And after all of this, they survive it. There's not even a smell of fire on it, on them. In verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar responded to this event and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielding up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God." Nebuchadnezzar, in the end, praises these three men for their trust in God. He praises them for violating the king's command. He praises them for yielding up their bodies, for making the ultimate sacrifice. And then he praises them for their exclusivity of worship. All four of those things are things that Nebuchadnezzar was not going to praise him for a half hour earlier. So how quickly the tides can turn, right? People are fickle. Nebuchadnezzar says, "You will die. I'll throw you in the fire." Half hour later, he's like, "Man, these guys are great and I love their God. Everybody should worship their God." Fickle. So if people are going to change tomorrow, what's the answer? Don't worry about the people, right? Follow God. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. People will change. Their attitudes towards you will come and go. Don't worry about that. Trust God. He'll get you through it. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add or thoughts before we close? Yes?
One other thing, like we were talking about, how we're not alone, never alone. And I think that we judge things by what we see with our eyes, outcome. But just as whether it was our Lord Christ in the fiery furnace or not, we, of course, the Old Testament is our tutor to train us. We can see in Acts chapter 7 where Stephen, he was preaching, and then it says in verse 54 and 55, and when they heard these things, they were cut in the heart, and they gashed at him with their teeth. But he, being full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he was stoned to death. He died. People that from the outside would have looked at that and said, Jesus wasn't with him. But he was with him to the end, and he took the Spirit.
Absolutely. And that is the truth of it. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said that as well. If we die, we die, but God's still God. And he's here. And he can do whatever he wants. There is that submission to his authority and his power. Okay, then we will close up there. Do the elders have any announcements at this point? Yes. Oh, we got one announcement, and then Shelby said that he would lead us in a closing prayer.